Perhaps you're on first.
Am I first?
Yeah, the chairman will call you at the appropriate time. If right hand button switched on and the right hand button switched off.
Chairman, you will allow a comfort break, won't you?
Yeah, when would you like it?
Right, so think about an hour from now.
3 o'clock.
Please, thank you. It's the pills, you know.
Yeah, I know, yeah, keep taking. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this meeting of the Southern Planning Committee. We are not expecting a fire drill today. In the event of the alarm, please leave the building and get outside at the front. I am obliged to inform you that this meeting is being live streamed and recorded. Could I ask that you please ensure to switch off your mobile phones? In order that those watching the live stream know who is speaking, could members and officers introduce themselves prior to speaking? To ensure that all members of this committee and all points raised by public speakers are properly heard, I must advise you that I will not tolerate any disruptive behaviour. This is a meeting held in public, not a public meeting. If such behaviour persists and takes place, I will adjourn the meeting. I will now ask members of the committee and officers to introduce themselves, please.
Good afternoon, I'm Councillor Robertson, representing Brian Key Division. Andy Boddington, Ludlow North.
Nigel Lumbey, Albrighton.
Councillor Vince Hunt, Planner. I am here substituting for Councillor Hilary Luff.
Thank you. Mark?
Gerald Aiken, I'm here substituting for Claire White.
Councillor Nick Higlet, representing Ray Valley Ward.
Councillor Tony Parsons, representing Basin Hill, Column and Son.
Councillor Caroline Bagnall, representing Broseley.
Councillor Jeff Elmer, representing Richard Marshall.
Richard Huffer, representing Clee.
Now we'll ask the officers, please.
Graham French, Principal Planner.
Richard Fortune, Principal Planner. Idris Iqbal, Solicitor.
And I'm David Evans, councillor for Chepstow and Craven Arms, and also chair this committee. Right, we have apologies for absence. We have apologies for Tilbury Laugh and Vincent is substituting. We have apology from Richard Marshall and Jeff Eleanor for substituting, and Gerald Dakin is substituting for Claire Wild. Are there any public questions, please? Okay, I take that as a no. Minutes of the last meeting, held on the 20th of September and also on the 7th of September. Can I have a proposal for the minutes, please? Thank you. Everybody in favour, as was there? Thank you.
I'm only abstaining because I wasn't there.
Okay. Disclosure of community interest, please. Councillor Hopper,
First item on the agenda, Chair, as a local member.
thank you. Any other? Okay, thank you. Right, we're going to item 5, which is affordable dwelling, land west of Greenhead, Burford, Tenderwell. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, the application before us here is for a single lot exception site for affordable dwelling. I think let's start by running you through the PowerPoint so you can see the site, the context, and the few photographs we have. So can the first slide, please. This plan shows the basic location of the site. It may be easier if you just see the context that there is a property to the north, away from the actual site, you can see on the map there, and also off screen to the south, basically, where the road features out. There's also some properties there, which I think members will see on the plan that forms part of our commission report at the start of the item. If you move on to the next slide, please. Again, it's just a slightly larger blow up, shall we say, of that first image. If just move on to the next one, I think it's to help us better. This is the red line that defines the extent of the application size. As originally submitted, the access to the site was going to be on the southern edge, at the point between where you can see those two trees at the bottom of the screen, on the other side of the road. Access point was intended there. It's a land ownership issue, which that has been amended, and now the access is intended to be the red line that we can see heading northeastwards on that screen, which actually goes through the a private stable yard, and then we're utilising existing access, which you can see top right. The footprints you can see there, the green shading is the proposed dwelling, and then just to the east of that is the proposed garage. Next slide, please. This shows the proposed dwelling within the 100 square metre limit that is imposed on affordable dwellings. A 3-bedroom bungalow, timber clad with a sheet roof. Next slide, please. This shows the garage arrangements for the intended property, with one enclosed and one open element. Next slide, please. This again is just views of the site. The actual site will be just to the right of the trees you see in the centre of the screen. That would be the intended location for the property. Next slide, please. In its view from the southwest, the fence line we see there is the northwest boundary to the plot. Next slide, please. This again is along the road frontage, but it's going to remain unchanged, you'll see now, with the access arrangements being utilising the existing stable access. So that's the view looking northeast along the road frontage. Next one, please. And there's the sort of the southwest view, the equivalent position. Next slide, please. Describe that from the southwest tip of the site looking out in a northerly direction to show the sort of landscape setting in that direction. Next slide, please. And it's a similar vantage point looking northwest. Next one, please. This is the view from the northeast. We've got a series of views here. This is a sort of long distance shot. In the middle of the screen, essentially, is a small stable building, and it will be to the right of that. That's the intended location for the dwelling. If you move to the next slide, please. This again is a sort of telephoto image from that shot. You can see the stable building centre of the screen, and to the right is where the intended dwelling would be. And next one, please. And again, that's just a further enlargement of that. Right, if we can perhaps go back to the couple of screenshots, please. Yeah, okay, we stay back, that'll be fine, thank you. So the key issues here is there's no disputing the fact that the intended applicants do meet the criteria to be eligible for an affordable dwelling. The issue here is whether this site forms part of the recognisable name settlement, and also then what is the nature of the landscape impact. The operative view here is this particular site is too detached from existing built groupings of dwellings in that location to be regarded as being part and parcel of that recognisable name settlement. And in terms of the actual landscape impact, the view is that without further built form here would be detracted from the overall character of the landscape. Members will be aware that they've been brought to their attention various other permissions for single affordables that have been allowed in the area over the last sort of 10 to 11 years. And the distinguishing factor between this site and those is all those sites actually were adjacent to existing dwellings. This particular site is not of that same nature, and that is why all those approvals, which actually were dealt with by officers of delegated powers, that has been the factor that meets and ensures some consistency in the view of officers. This site particularly is one where we do not consider it meets that same locational criteria, and also we consider that the overall impact on the landscape of adding a further built form here in terms of the dwelling would not be appropriate. So members will see the two refusal reasons set out in the report that are recommended.
Thank you. Thank you, Richard. We now have some speakers on this, and the first one is a local resident, and he's asked the solicitor to read out a letter. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Chair. We've received by our solicitor. It's a statement from Richard Amplet. Dear councillors, I fully endorse the need to support young persons who live and work in rural communities and for them to have the opportunity to get on the property ladder. However, I regret that it's clear that this application neither meets the criteria for a single exception site scheme, nor does it constitute an essential rural workers dwelling. I would respectfully ask that the Council Planning Committee agree with the case officer's recommendation and refuse the application on the following grounds. The application lies outside a recognised name settlement and therefore does not meet the local criteria for single exception schemes. It is not adjacent to any other residential curtilage and is in open countryside. The application does not constitute an essential rural workers dwelling, as the land that it is associated with is not permitted for commercial use. The land itself is ancient agricultural pasture land, and the recent erection of stabling are ancillary to that use. The permitted use of the stabling is for private equine use only, whereas it is already being used to kennel a pack of very noisy and often distressed hunting dogs. Within less than 5 kilometres of the proposed site, there are a significant number of affordable dwellings available or under construction that lie within recognised name settlements. I would draw your attention to the current construction of 33 affordable dwellings at the Castle Reach development in Burford as one example. The application is not the owner of the site, and therefore, if transference were to be effected, it would mean that the site would have no legal connection to the stabling and field. Widespread local opinion is that the planning proposal is in fact a method of achieving planning permission for a dwelling that will in fact be lived in by the owner of the site. Local residents are at a loss to understand why this application has been referred to the planning committee when the council's case officer recommended it should be refused. It is clear that the application does not meet the criteria for a single exception site. In addition, there are many other nearby large-scale multiple affordable dwelling sites that are currently under construction or under construction that will provide significant accommodation opportunities within recognised name settlements for many young people requiring affordable dwellings, including this applicant, rather than at this single one-off location in open countryside. On the basis of the above points, together with the case officer's recommendation, I would request that planning permission is not granted for this application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Chairman, could we just repeat who that letter was from, please?
It was from Richard Amplet.
He's a local resident, so. Okay, we now go on to the Parish Council speaker from Nash Parish Council, and it's Mr. Peter Stubbs, please. And you have 3 minutes to address the committee, sir. Thank you.
Nash Parish Council has considered this application at great length, hearing submissions from both applicants and complainants, We have visited the site, and as residents, we are fully aware of the location and its relationship with the surrounding landscape. Many councillors have detailed knowledge of applicants' background and the requirements of the future. After hearing all the submissions and lengthy discussions at our meetings on 15th of July, 16th September, the council were unanimous in their support for the application because Harriet has a clear need for housing in the Nash community. There are no affordable housing available in Nash. Harriet meets the criteria under the affordable housing scheme. The siting and design will not materially affect the surrounding landscape or current land use. Nearby properties will not be adversely affected. Access is adequate to support the proposal. As a council, we are disappointed that the recommendation for refusal has been made without a visit to site. The recommendation also appears to have been made on the basis that the site is not considered to be part of a recognised settlement. The plot in question is in fact part of Old Greenway Farm, which was part of the Round Oak settlement signposted from the main road. The area of Nash is made up of mainly isolated properties, and unfortunately the clusters of houses that do exist have no opportunity for applicants like Harriet to build a property within them. This recognised settlement requirement should therefore not be a material consideration. Harriet has access to land in only one location. We carried out a survey of all households in 2019, and the results showed a clear need for additional affordable housing, primarily for young family members. Survey statistics showed that the housing stock in Nash is predominantly larger and older type properties, which by definition will be out of reach and suitable for younger members of our community. Over 40% of people responding thought we needed additional properties in Nash. We are a small community spread over a wide area, and the last 18 months have shown us that communities need to work together in support of each other. If we are not to become a community of retired and wealthy, we need to retain and give
30 seconds, sir.
We need to retain and give opportunity for younger members of our society who wish to stay in, work and support the Nash community in the future. We can only do this if they have suitable and affordable housing in Nash and are not being forced out. For these reasons, Nash Parish Council wholeheartedly supports Harriet's planning application and implore the members of this committee to do the same. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, we're another speaker on this now. It's a local member, and that's Richard Upper. And you have 5 minutes, Richard, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, committee. I must admit, firstly,
Use mine, please.
apologies. I think the first thing I need to do is to challenge the statement that this is the first application that is not adjacent. That is not the case. And had a site visit been present, actually, the two I'm thinking of is actually Harriet's brothers that run a very successful civil engineering business that were built totally separate, not in conjunction with any other properties. So I will challenge that. The only thing that was on that site was an agricultural building some distance away. I've watched this young lady grow up with her 2 brothers. As I said, her 2 brothers run a successful civil engineering business throughout Shropshire, Herefordshire and Worcestershire. And if you do want groundworks done, that would probably be your first point of call to go. Both of them live in affordable houses, yards away. If you have need for further local connection, I can go back 3 generations, but I believe that the connection goes back at least 5 or 6. This is not a question or in question, but what is in question is the recognised settlement argument. As you come off the Clear Hills towards Burford and Tenbury and through Nash, Nash comprises of no large settlements, but a number of smaller hamlet settlements. The Knoll, Knollgate, the Rugpits, and the Round Oak before you entering Burford. All of these presently have affordable houses in them. Refer to the question of recognised settlements. Anybody referring to any of these settlements locally knows precisely where you mean. And in my interpretation, that identifies it as a recognised settlement. Nash being a linear type community throughout its full length, it has a church, it has an old school, but it is a dispersed community, a rural community, quite unique in its character. The affordable houses, the affordable homes that have been approved throughout Nash have been considered by a number of different officers over the years. All homes approved under delegated power, with never ever a mention of committee referrals. The case officer, happy to refer this, and I can only speak as I felt she was happy for her recommendation to be challenged. Planning South, to my knowledge, has never ever refused an application based on recognised settlement. I can remember a young vet up in the Clon Valleys, I think in Nigel Harting's division. We went on the minibus and went to look at that application. I remember it well. It's what the affordable housing policy for. We went against officer recommendation for refusal, and it was approved. And to my knowledge, we've never ever refused on that basis. You have heard from the parish council that have travelled a mile, less than a mile from the Worcestershire border to support this application. Round Oak has affordable houses already in it, and if you probably look just above that rise, there's an affordable property there. There's affordable properties at the Rugpits, and as they are throughout the village.
30 seconds.
Okay. It's not in isolation. There are buildings there. Due weight should be given to the local member and the parish council. The nearest neighbour, which is just to the left of that shot, is in support. And the one objection that we've received cannot even see that location. And looking back from the other way, the neighbouring farm is also in support.
Thank you, Richard. Just sum up.
Okay, I think this application stands on its own merit, and I hope members feel able to support this application. I shall now leave and you to deliberate.
Thank you. I've now got the agent, Diane Humphries, please. And you have 3 minutes to address the committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. In this case, it has been evidence that the applicant is in housing need, has strong local connections, and a genuine need to reside in the immediate locale because of family commitments and employment. As such, Harriet is wholly policy compliant. In relation to the site, the Council's adopted policy offers the following advice. A settlement always comprises a group of houses occupied by households from different families. The policy explains that where the number of houses is small, or where the houses are dispersed, it is the combination of these factors that determines whether the dwellings constitute settlement. The policy further advises that because a settlement is a relationship between these different properties, the limits of the settlement are defined by where the properties, where that relationship peters out. This will be further informed by the settlement pattern and the views of the local community. In relation to Round Oak, it has been evidenced that within the settlement there are 13 houses, These 13 houses are dispersed, giving Roundoak a loose-knit settlement pattern. The precise limit of the settlement boundary for Roundoak is therefore a matter of judgment. The policy emphasises that this judgment should be informed by the local member and the parish council, who are best placed to understand these relationships within their communities. In settlements that are loose-knit in character, the policy advises that it is acceptable for an exception to site to be a short distance from that settlement. This plot is approximately 120 metres from Elm Cottage to the south and 130 metres to Greendale to the northeast. It is therefore considered that whilst this site doesn't immediately adjoin another residential property, it remains wholly policy compliant. Officers are advised to seek the view of the local member at the pre-application stage. This was done and the local member supported this site. The application has also been wholly supported by the parish council. It is therefore disappointing that the officers have not aligned their view and consequently their recommendation with that of both the parish council and the local member, as they have done in all the other examples already circulated for affordable dwellings. Clearly, isolated remote sites should be resisted. This site is neither. It is well grouped with existing buildings and the design has been kept single storey
30 seconds.
to assist with its assimilation into the wider landscape. It is hoped, therefore, that the Planning Committee will approve this application for an affordable dwelling made in response to an identified local need. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Do you want to come back to Richard?
Yes, Chair. Well, again, it is one of these situations where it is a matter of judgment as to whether or not one considers this site to be compliant with the policy. You have to bear in mind it isn't a situation where we can be very sympathetic to all who have an affordable housing need, but bloody, that doesn't mean it's a free-for-all for any site then to be just acceptable. Now, obviously, there are views here, both for and against. Contrary views being expressed as to whether or not this can be regarded as being part of a settlement or not. And yes, it's true that from the outset, the pre-application stage, there's a difference of opinion between officers and the local member in the parish. But it is a situation where officers do try to be consistent in what they advise, not just in relation to any particular locality, but in general how they deal with these particular sites. And when you have criteria set out in your own SPD as to what we need to look at, there can be sites that essentially a location which we would judge are not acceptable, but 100 to 200 metres away could well be acceptable. But as I say, this is one really, it's down to the committee now to look at the arguments put forward as to whether they consider this to be a site that is compliant with that policy. And then secondly, in terms of the actual issue of landscape impact, which I hope the photographs will be sufficient for them to make a judgment on, as to whether or not they consider there's any harm in that respect, because there are two refusal reasons that the committee needs to think about in terms of what's recommended in the report, which they need to consider, and if they are to take a different view, need to set out for the purposes of the committee decision the reasons for that different view being taken.
Thank you, Richard. Councillor Boddington.
Thank you, Chair. This is a site that we should have visited. It's one of the major reasons, 50% of the refusal reason is actually impact on the landscape. And it's very hard to judge that from slides taken from different directions produced on the screen, where it's very difficult to get a real grip of the topography and the relationship. Can I also say that I'm very uncomfortable with turning down a scheme without visiting the site where it's so critical to the livelihoods and the well-being of the people who are applying. Now, there may be good reasons for turning this down, and that's fine, but I think it's disrespectful and inappropriate not to visit and actually look at the site in detail, just different slides. That's it. We're not talking about a huge high-impact dwelling here. We're talking about a low dwelling that's in character with others in the landscape and will blend in. I accept the arguments made by Diane Humphreys that it's 120 to 130 metres away from other properties. Now, if you're in the middle of Shrewsbury, that'll be a long distance. But down at Nash and many of the areas in the southwest where we have dispersed settlements with properties quite a long way apart, but they're still part of the same settlement. That's the nature of the landscape, and it's been recognised for many, many years that we have these dispersed settlements across southwest Shropshire. So I'm inclined, because it's very clearly there on local need, that I don't think it's going to have such a huge impact on the landscape. And I do think it is within the dispersed settlements that we have at Roundoak or Greenway Farm that we should actually go for this. But I welcome other members' views.
Councillor Tindall, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got a 125,000 on the survey map, because we didn't have a site visit, which I regret tremendously. And although we won't discuss it now, I would like to get to the bottom of why we weren't allowed a site visit. Particularly as Councillor Waddington says that 50% of the reason the case officer has recommended refusal is the would virtually visually detract from and spoil the open countryside. Well, I really do not think that one small 100 square metre measured internally building to our right, as I look at it, backing into that rising ground of the hill behind, was any way going to spoil the open countryside or detract from it. So I think 50% of the case officer's reasons fall away completely. And again, looking at the ordnance survey map for the area, there are quite a number of dwellings and buildings in that area. And we've mentioned the Roundoak, Church Cottages, Nurton, Greendale, running all the way past the, sorry, I can't quite read it on the screen, but it would be helpful if we could have the location map up again, please. There, I've not, yes. It's the next one on, which on my map is called Nurton, but I think on this it's called Greendale. And then you do a sharp right going to southeast, and you come to the Greenway Head and then the Rug Pits. I hope I've pronounced all those correctly. So I'm quite satisfied it's part of a settlement, albeit a dispersed one. And if you read any of the textbooks on the nature of the South Shropshire countryside, it's the very nature of dispersed settlements that are so often mentioned, and you don't find many nucleated villages with a nice little village green with a pond on it and a duck swimming around on it in these parts of Shropshire. I shall certainly be voting to reject the officer's recommendation to refuse. Thank you.
Councillor Hunt, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm obviously I'm a visiting member today, substituting, and I don't particularly know this part of Shropshire well, which could be a disadvantage, but it could also be an advantage. I mean, I've written 2 pages of notes here. First of all, I wasn't particularly keen. It wasn't, as far as I was concerned, a named settlement. But having listened to what's been said, I have to say my opinion has changed. We've heard that Roundoak, the area, contains 13 houses. As my colleague just said, it's not unusual in any part of Shropshire to find dispersed areas. It wouldn't necessarily constitute a village, wouldn't necessarily constitute even a hamlet. But put together in the wider context, I think they do become a settlement. We've heard very eloquently from the parish council to say that, you know, the local need is well known here. We've heard from the local member that he's known 3 generations of the family. I think really it's subjective, the opinion that officers have taken on what a settlement is. And it's subjected to the point where the determination has been led by policy as opposed to the local member, the parish council, and indeed some of the neighbours, granted not all of them. I was interested when we were told that should we look to turn over the officer's recommendation that we would need to set out the reasons. I'm not aware that we need to set out reasons for approving an application, only if we're turning one down that's been recommended for approval. It's unlikely that the applicant, if we were to approve this, would be asking the inspector to step in and examine our reasons for granting the application. I've been swayed by the local member. It is subjective. I think there is enough evidence being given by the parish council who know the area. Some of the local members
and therefore not accepting the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. I've just been told that the audio has gone wrong, so can we just pause the meeting for a few minutes?
Apologies, we just need to reinstate the live feed.
I apologise if that was me.
Could have been me.
It certainly was, Mr. Speaker.
That's probably right.
It's a bit too early for a comfort break, I'm
Yeah,
afraid.
yeah.
Yes, I'm not ready yet.
Don't just let us know when you are.
Stop jiggling then. Sorry.
Chair, Joe Lincoln here. Is it possible to show again the size of that garage compared to the house? After working. And what's that in square meters?
Well, in terms of showing two standard cars, it's going to be essentially probably about sort of 5 metres by 5 metres square, I'd say 5 metres by 6 metres. So very typical for a double garage, in the order of 25 to 30 square metres.
Chairman, because it's detached, it's not part of the 100 square metres, just so that I can make that point in case anybody didn't know.
Apologies, everyone, we're now okay to carry on, Chair.
Thank you. Could you finish, councillor Parsons?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Councillor Hignett, please.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Nick Hignett. One of the things about an affordable property is that you need, or the applicant needs to be able to afford, not just to purchase the land if necessary, but to build the property. And I think we need to take that into consideration when we're looking at how many other affordable properties are about in the area, because they may not be suitable for this particular applicant. I have no problem with the dispersed settlement. I've dealt with applications in the past on the Central Committee, particularly around the area of Crofton, which I know very well. There were a lot of question marks there over whether an application was actually in the hamlet or settlement, and in the end we were swayed by the fact that the road signs indicated that settlement, and the application site was within that settlement. I don't know, without the benefit of a site visit, whether there are road signs for the settlement. It's a small hamlet, and if there are road signs, in my opinion, when you go past that road sign, you're in the settlement. But as I say, I don't know where the road signs are there. I do take the point that there's other affordable dwellings in the area, but the design materials for this build, I think, are very appropriate, even the
Please restart, Chairman. We very much hope that will be it now.
Thank you. Councillor Bagwell, you just carry on.
Okay, thank you. I was just saying that I'm very much of the opinion that we need to be making sure that there is enough affordable housing in communities, particularly in rural communities, so that young people can stay there and keep their communities thriving. And here we seem to have a young person who is committed to her local community, who fulfills the criteria for affordable housing. And I think we should also be taking into account the opinions expressed by local residents who very much seem to be in support of this person. So yeah, although on the one hand it is a shame always to be covering up fields with buildings, I think in this particular case I think the design is sympathetic, and I am of the opinion that I will support this application.
Thank you. Do you want to come back in, Richard?
Chairman, I think, in terms of what the points that members made, and I hope that the photographs assisted in this, they've been very sort of thorough in their understanding of the case and looking at the issues of landscape impact and how designing the building, in their view, would or would not fit within that. So I think in terms of the comment I made about the need for members to explain why they potentially might go against your recommendation, that is advice that we've had from our sister on other applications to the committee, regardless of the degree of support or objection to it. And the committee have, shall I say, though they're not voted yet, have put forward a basis for coming to a different conclusion to the officers, which I would not disagree. So in terms of that particular requirement, I can say that has been adhered to. Obviously, members will be coming to a vote soon on this. Were there to be a recommendation moving to approve this application, I would just add that it would need to be subject to a Section 106 agreement to ensure that properties remain affordable in perpetuity. We also have the situation of a rather odd access arrangement here. So again, in terms of to ensure that that also remains, regardless in the future as to who may or may not be occupying this affordable dwelling, because it's there for the long term of the community, not just for the first initial individual. So we feel that detail should also be perhaps incorporated within the 106 to ensure that that does always remain as an access route available to the property. And there will then be the other standard requirements of our policy in respect to the maximum internal floor space, 100 square metres, withdrawal permitted development rights, and conditions related to materials, landscaping, drainage. Drainage we know here is intended to be connected to the existing septic tank on the site next door. So again, we just want to make sure we're covering that that's got adequate capacity. So if there would be delegated authority to attach appropriate conditions and also be subject to the Section 106 agreement in terms of the normal requirements, just with the added issue of the access and usual arrangement needs to be taken into account in this case.
Thank you, Richard. Councillor Boddington, please.
Thank you, Chair. It's clear we are, as Richard said, moving towards a conclusion, and so I would like to propose that we reject the officer's recommendation, recognising that there is an identified level of need. The building will be low impact on the landscape and will be within a dispersed settlement, and we would delegate details of S106 and detailed conditions to officers.
Thank you. Councillor Tindall, please.
Yes, I'm happy to second that proposal, and for the same reason as Councillor Boddington quoted.
Thank you. Right, we now got a proposal to accept dwelling on this site. Proposed and seconded. All those in favour of supporting an application to allow a dwelling to be built on this site? That's unanimous. Thank you. Thank you very much. You want to do a councillor break now, Mr. Tindall?
I think that's a really good one. I think I'm ready now.
Give you 5 minutes.
Well, I'll be quicker than that.
Everybody changes their names. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Tony, have you heard anything about this year? Okay.
With Cole Markey.
He's got COVID, but I think he's all right. You know, I haven't heard him any sort of that he's taken ill, severely ill or anything like that. I think he's okay.
Hillary tells me she's got a bad cough.
They were at the same meeting, I think.
Dangerous business, this council stuff, isn't it?
I didn't realise it's got something to do with the children's nursery.
Yeah, well,
And
that
that's
could be
you.
a risk.
Yeah, yeah, that's more like it. She was saying that's why she was doing LFTs all the time.
Yeah.
Just wasn't somebody this morning that had those jabs, then yesterday they went for their booster jab.
Yeah.
They were really badly affected by the booster jab.
Oh,
That's because they had strong antibodies already.
Could be. Yeah, I mean, their arm went really sore, they felt absolutely whacked. Yeah, and they weren't expecting it because the
Did
first
they
and
have the
second.
same one that they had, same
Yeah,
jab?
apparently it was the Pfizer.
Yeah.
I thought they were going to give the booster jab was going to be the opposite to what you'd had before.
with you 1 second.
Thank you. Right, coming to item number 6, which is sell of sand and gravel supply at Gonville Quarry, Dorin, Condover. Thank you, Graham.
Thank you, Chair. If we could have the first slide, please. Thank you. I'm going to leave the slide at the moment with the site plan. If we can just advance that, and then I will give my presentation. That's fine, thank you. And then there are a number of other slides which I'll quickly go through afterwards, which some of which show the route through the village of Condover. So this application is for an allocated southern extension to Gonville Quarry, which will last for 6 years with progressive working and restoration to a mix of agricultural and wildlife habitats. The application site is located off Station Road between Dorrington and Condover, south of the existing quarry. It comprises 23.2 hectares within the existing quarry and another 5.1 hectares southern extension, which you can see to the south in the green demarcation on the plan in front of you. So the application is a resubmission of an application which was refused by a committee on the 16th of March this year. The key change is that the proposed annual output has been reduced by 30% from 150,000 to 110,000 tonnes per annum. Associated proposal for a satellite depot at Northern Farm, just to the north of Condover, has also been removed following relocation of the quarry's bagging plant to another quarry at Moorville near Bridgenorth. This reduces the need for the depot as customer traffic in larger articulated vehicles is now being directed preferentially towards Moorville and away from Condover. The previous refusal was on the basis of the requirement of development guidelines accompanying the allocation policy and MD5B of the Sandover plan to construct an alternative access avoiding Condover, and that this had not been met. And as such, there would be a continued HGV impact on the village and a corresponding impact on local amenities. The applicant appealed against this refusal reason, and a 4-day public inquiry is scheduled to commence on the 5th of December. However, the applicants confirmed that if the current application is approved, then the appeal will be withdrawn. So Condover Parish Council has objected based on concerns about HGV movements through the village, associated highway safety and amenity concerns, and the fact that no provision of the new access specified in the development guidelines is proposed under this application. 56 local residents have objected on the same grounds, and the objectors group CRAG has further detailed these concerns, and that is addressed in the update reports. So there's no objections from technical consultees, including the Environment Agency and the Council's Highways, Regulatory Service, Historic Environment, Ecology, Drainage and Trees teams. The NPPF advises that great weight should be given to the benefits of mineral working, including the economy, and states that applications should only be refused on highway grounds where the residual impacts are severe. In this case, highway officers and other technical consultees have not objected, and the application puts forward mitigation measures to control quarry traffic. This includes a commitment to pay a £65,000 highway maintenance contribution if permission is granted. This would be in addition to £50,000 which has already been paid or is due under the existing planning consent. Relocation of the bagging plant to Moorville Quarry represents a further positive response from the applicant to local concerns. The proposed extension is allocated for mineral working by Sandover Policy MD5B. Development guidelines accompanying the policy indicate that proposals should be linked to new access to the A49 north of the quarry. However, the applicants advise that the current application is too small to bear the substantial cost of providing the new access. Additionally, Highways England has maintained an in-principle objection to the single-source new traffic junctions on trunk roads, including the proposed access for Gonville. A larger area to the north of Gonville Quarry is also allocated in the Sandover plan, containing about 4 to 5 times as much mineral, and this may be able to support the cost of the new access if Highways England objection can be overcome. The Sandover development guidelines are a material consideration which set out expectations for an application to comply with. The committee report indicates that in 623 why delivery of the new access is not feasible for the current application. The update report sets out the legal status of development guidelines with reference to relevant case law. The key conclusions are that the guidelines does not form part of the policy and there's no reference to the requirement for a new access in the policy itself. Hence, failure to comply with the guidelines cannot prevent compliance with the development plan policy overall. The supporting text advises that any new application should be in accordance with the relevant local plan policies and development guidelines. It is not must be in accordance. It's therefore a discretionary requirement to be weighed against other material considerations referred to in the report. The requirement is trying to secure, thirdly, a benefit and not to prevent a harm, and thus non-delivery of the new access cannot justify a refusal. Given the absence of objection from the Highway Authority and other consultees and the fact that the development guidelines do not represent an obligatory requirement of policy, refusal on highway grounds would be difficult to defend at appeal. The applicants advise that if it becomes economic to develop the larger northern extension, then all highway matters would be reassessed against the presumption that quarry traffic should be directed away from Condover. The Residents' Action Group has raised a number of other detailed objections which the officers responded to in the additional representations report. The current permission for Gonsall Quarry issued in 2017 restricts output to 50,000 tonnes per annum, although historically quarries consistently produced at rates of 190 to 200,000 tonnes. The output restriction was imposed not for highway safety reasons, but because it was not anticipated that the specialist mineral in the current working area would be worked at a greater rate. However, resource problems at the applicants over other quarries have led to pressure to increase production at Gonsall in order to meet contractual demand. Additionally, Condover Quarry, run by a competitor Hanson, which is to the north of Condover village, has been closed for 2 years, which also has placed pressure on Gonsall as the only local supplier of sand and gravel. The applicant has worked mineral above the permitted rate since the current permission was granted in 2017 up until fairly recently. This is not condoned. However, the relocation of bagging plant to Moorville Quarry has resulted in a material reduction in quarry traffic, and the current application seeks to regularise the situation at a rate which is significantly below historic norms. If the current application is refused, then the applicant's appeal will proceed on the earlier refusal. If the appeal succeeds, then the applicant would have the option to implement the original scheme at the higher rate of 150,000 tonnes per annum. Additionally, there's no guarantee that an inspector would support the requirement of the legal agreement to make a pence per tonne highway maintenance contribution. So whilst the concerns of the local community are fully recognised, available evidence indicates that refusal of the current application will potentially lead to a worse outcome on conclusion of the current appeal. So local community liaison groups have recently been recommended as a means of facilitating dialogue between officers and local community where highway concerns have been identified. This is the case, for example, with the Iron Bridge Power Station site, which members considered last month. It suggested that if members were minded to accept the officer recommendation, a similar mechanism could be employed at Condover in order to inform priorities for spending the applicant's highway maintenance contribution, and other highway initiatives can be investigated also. So in terms of other issues, including ecology, hydrology, agriculture, trees and amenity, the environmental statement concludes that proposals are policy compliant. The absence of objection from technical consultees supports this conclusion. Detailed planning conditions have been recommended, and these were to be supported by a legal agreement reinforcing existing routing restriction and securing highway maintenance contribution. Subject to this, it's recommended that permission be granted. Just one point, there should have been in Appendix 1 a reference to a restriction on the dispatch time of quarry vehicles, so that it is effectively avoiding peak school opening or drop off and pick up time, shall I say, because as you'll see from the photos that are in the late Reps report, that there is a restriction issue where cars are outside designated areas at the school, and that can cause highway issues. So the proposal and the officer requirements recommendation is that a half-hour slot for the morning peak drop-off and peak afternoon pick-up times should be identified where vehicles are not dispatched from the quarry. If I can very quickly flick through the slides, and as I said, perhaps, you know, a couple of seconds for each slide, if I can ask that we progress them, and I'll very quickly sort of explain them as we're moving forward, because there's a few of them. So starting with the next slide, please. So we're just looking at phasing plans. If you can just automatically click forward every 3 seconds, please, and then we can go through them. Thank you. So this is the way the quarry would be built out to the southern extension there, which is well contained behind woodland. There's one property on the end, but that to the southern boundary, but that's not being they're not objecting, and they have a kind of screening. This is a restoration scheme, which is effectively to a luxury great crested new habitat under licence from Natural England. So we're just seeing the sort of wider restoration for the quarry site here, which incorporates the northern area and the existing quarry void. So it's a very large area of sort of habitat benefit, effectively. So this is just a cross section through the void, which shows the sort of differences of land levels from north to south and east to west. Moving on. So we're looking now at the visual impact appraisal, which essentially, if we can keep advancing the slides, indicates that the quarry is very well screened in terms of the landscape which surrounds it. There aren't any sort of obvious views other than from the house to the south, where the applicant, where the owner of the house has not objected to the scheme. So we've got, now we're looking, if we can just hold on to this slide for a bit, we're looking at where the two allocations are in relation to the quarry. We've got a small southern allocation, which you see annotated, and there's a larger northern allocation with a lot more mineral in it. You'll see the blue line in the top right, left-hand side of the screen is the sort of nominal location of the new access route, and you'll see that in order for a link to be made from the southern extension, you have to go all the way through the restored quarry voids, and that's going to have issues for the new licence and for delaying restoration of the voids to the sort of habitat benefits that we're looking at. Additionally, there's a steep ramp at the northern end where you have a 20-metre slope. If we can move forward, please, now at a sort of 3-second interval. So here we have the Condover Conservation Area, the bulk of which, so can you just reverse the slide? Sorry, yeah, it's down that route. The bulk of the conservation area and the associated listed buildings are located to the southeast. The quarry access route is the red line, which is going through to the northwest in a sort of from the bottom left-hand side of the side of the slide to the top middle, and you'll see that there are 4. Well, in fact, there are 8 listed buildings that are on the side of the route. 4 of those stand back within their curtilages from the edge of the route, and 2 are near to the edge of the route, Rose Cottage and a barn at the southern end of the site. And there's a wall which has a milestone into the southern end of the site as well. We'll see those on the slide, so we can just move forward very, very quickly. The point is that the bulk of the conservation area interest is nucleated to the south. So we're just looking at a route through the village at the moment. You'll see, if we can just reverse, no, actually that's fine. If we stick on that one, the top left-hand slide, it does show that where there is parking outside the school, outside of the bays, that the road is constricted, and that is an issue. And we are seeking, as I say, to prevent exacerbating that through delaying dispatch of quarry vehicles during that timescale. Can we just move on now as per normal? Thank you. So we have listed buildings. Sorry, can you just return? So there's one listed building on the bottom right-hand side, which is southern end of the village. That's the converted stables. There's another which is beyond that, which is the bridge, Condover Bridge over the Cumber Brook. On the right-hand, bottom left, you'll see Rose Cottage, which is another listed building, which is right up against the quarry boundary. But I think right up against the quarry road boundary. I think there may be more. Is there another slide, or have we run out of slides now? If we run out of slides, I'll probably stop speaking. Okay, so we can return to the last one. Just to say, we have Highway Officer Mr. Wooden here today, and as highways is clearly a critical element of this application. Chair, with your authorisation, can I just invite Mark to give a very quick appraisal of the highway situation?
Okay, thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Mark Whitton Highways. Obviously, this is the second time this come before members. I think some of the members here may well have heard the previous debate, and I think there's some new ones here that perhaps haven't. Clearly, this is a contentious application, as many quarry applications are, because of the nature of producing HGVs. And this is not, where a situation where it is a perfect access route to the site. There are constraints. There are constraints shown obviously by the photographs that are shown. I think if you can just come back from the photograph that's on screen at the moment. Sorry, go back forwards, sorry. So on that photograph, you'll see that the bifurcated junction there, that's one constraint where if lorries meet, there is, there can be a bit of an issue in customers sorting themselves out. And indeed, when I went on the site visit, that actually occurred. And yes, it was an issue for a brief period of time, but they sorted themselves out. There is the potential to look at recurbing that bifurcated area. I think it's a very sensitive area, however, locally. But engineering wise, there is the potential to improve that situation slightly. The photograph above obviously is the bridge over the Coombe Brook, which is obviously single width. However, there's good forward visibility there for vehicles to see one another and give way. We could just move forward. So if we just stop there, I think it's the photograph at the bottom which is perhaps pertinent, because that's where where there's a post office, a little lay-by there. You can see, I think it's the post vehicle actually in the lay-by, and that's from there on. That's where there is a bit of a constraint between there and the junction adjacent to the school, where two cars can pass each other quite easily, but two lorries can't, and we are aware through photographs that have been produced where it is a bit of a pinch point. I think, Chair, for members, this is not, as I say, this is not ideal in terms of there are constraints, but at the end of the day, the threshold that we have to meet in terms of objecting on highway grounds is severe, and that's a high threshold. And our judgment is so, Chair, that as I say, this has been a site quarry for over 50 years. I think 55, 56 years. We are not aware of any highway safety implications or capacity implications. So on those grounds, we do not feel that there's a substantive highway objection. We do not feel that it is defendable at appeal, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Back in red.
No.
Okay, now a list of speakers on this one. We've got Sarah Lee Williams. She's written an application against, which I will ask the solicitors to read out, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Interested file solicitor. This application under review should no more be considered than its predecessor, which was unanimously refused by this committee in March. The conciliatory reduction in extraction to 11,000 tonnes per annum from the previous 150,000 tonnes per annum is not sufficient mitigation to render this application worthy of your approval. The current level, in brackets, which we know has been flagrantly abused for years, is 50,000 tonnes per annum and already poses significant disruption and risk. A more than twofold increase would further increase the jeopardy faced by other road users and pedestrians in our village, not to mention the damage caused to properties and roadsides in the conservation area. The transport statement connected to this application is woefully misleading. As a community, we wish to carry out an independent safety audit, as we are certain it would contradict many of the statements in the transport summary. We have had discussions with professionals in the field familiar with the area. They are astounded at the traffic statement. Notably, they perceive the issues to be the obvious inability for HGVs to pass each other within the village boundaries, particularly in the 250-metre section between the narrow in brackets 3.8 metres listed bridge in the primary school past the Blind Bend. The mention of passing places where the carriageway is too narrow refers to private driveways. These should not be considered when legitimating the passage of HGVs through the village. They also deem the egress onto the primary route network A49 to be unsatisfactory. HGVs are obliged to cross the central line to make the bend on the southerly approach to the junction. This similarly occurred at the railway bridge. The inference that an apparent lack of serious RTAs is justification for continued heavy HGV using is galling. The number of near misses we hear about daily is frightening. Extreme heightened caution is the only reason more accidents haven't occurred. A fatality should not be the price we have to pay. The pavements are too narrow, the road is too narrow. Reimposing high levels of HGVs on this route is a danger to all. The risk assessment document held by the primary school in order to walk children to the church for services is pages and pages thick. The preschool choose not to venture out for walks as the level of risk is too high. Condover has been subjected to quarry traffic for decades. This has not been uncontested over time. With every application, strong and worthy objection is raised. The Samdale plan was drawn up to help regulate this, but it is being ignored. This application still contravenes MD5B. An alternative route would resolve the situation and allow uncontested extraction from Gonzal. That aside, it is important to remember that there is a sizable extension beginning shortly at Northern Quarry, which will easily fulfil local mineral obligations. This application has many failings, extensively detailed by the Condover Parish Council, who also object strongly. The integrity with which the applicant has conducted business has been questioned a number of times. Questions have been asked and to this day remain unanswered. As a community, we have a lack of trust in applications submitted by this applicant, which should be deemed unacceptable concerning operations directly affecting our quality of life. The residents of affected areas have spoken knowledgeably and eloquently on this application and its predecessor. Enough is enough.
Thank you. Right, now call on Edward Marvin, Condover Parish Council, and you have 3 minutes to address the committee, please, sir.
Thank you, Chair. Condover Parish Council fully supports the decision by the Southern Planning Committee on the 16th of March to refuse this planning application. The local plan requirement for a new access to the A49 avoiding Condover Village had not and still has not been met. These planning guidelines intend to mitigate the cumulative impact of quarry operations on the village and the residents of Condover. Ensuring such safeguards is a requirement of the National Planning Policy Framework, NPPF. The applicant refers to a Court of Appeal case, Asda versus Leeds City Council. Put briefly, this case established that a guideline containing the word should could not be interpreted as meaning must. Policy MD5B clearly states further extension of the Gonzal Quarry site will only be acceptable with the creation of a new access to the A49. The word should is not used. All lorry traffic to and from Gonzal Quarry passes through Condover Village Conservation Area and over a Grade 2 listed bridge. Deviating from the NPPF, Shropshire Council has not undertaken an historic environment impact assessment. In January 2019, in a letter to planning officers, Historic England strongly recommended the Conservation Officer assess the impact of Gonzal Quarry operations for the village and the bridge. The application has submitted, I beg your pardon, the applicant has submitted an assessment only focused on noise from the quarry for Condover Village. There has been negligible assessment of the impact of heavy vehicles on the fabric of the historic assets and the quality of life for residents. The applicant refers to the current extraction rate as 150,000 tonnes per annum. The current permitted rate is 50,000 tonnes per annum. The lack of enforcement does not validate this breach of planning conditions. The 110,000 tonnes per annum now proposed is not a reduction as claimed. On the contrary, it represents an increase in permitted extraction of 60,000 tonnes per annum, more than double the amount. There are no designated passing places along Station Road in the village. The informal passing places referred to are private land, mainly accessed by crossing the pavement. The curve in the road through the village makes it impossible to see oncoming traffic. Far from being manageable, the operational capacity and geometric nature of Station Road are a significant constraint. The absence of accidents better reflects the learned caution of residents rather than the lack of any risk posed. Many Condover parents, as we've heard, take their children to the primary school and preschool by car, in preference to walking along Station Road.
30 seconds, sir.
Thank you. Planning officers assert the presumption to grant consent overrides all but the most serious planning objections. In Asda versus Leeds City Council, the final judgment reached was that presumption is not something absolute. The judge said, the decision is a holistic one. We must therefore weigh any presumption to consent with any clear planning objections in the overall context of the case. Condover Parish Council therefore urges the Southern Planning Committee to give due weight to the material planning objections presented with full regard for context and vote to overturn the officer recommendation. Thank you,
sir. Thank you. I call on local member Dan Morris. You Dan, you have 5 minutes to address the committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This new application for Gonsall Quarry is effectively seeking to formalise the lorry movements to carry over twice the tonnage of what is currently allowed, from 50,000 tonnes to 110,000 tonnes, through the conservation village of Condover. Members may recall the reason for the March 21 refusal. This application conflicts with the development guidelines accompanying Sound Policy MD5 in that requirement for a new access to the A49 avoiding Condover village has not been met. Consequently, the proposals would result in an unacceptable continuation of large HGV movements through Condover village and conservation area. The applicant's mitigation proposals are considered insufficient. This new application still does not adequately address the reasons for a refusal, and so in my opinion, real reason for the committee to change its view with this new application. Just as a reminder, the route for the quarried material goes over a Grade 2 listed bridge, past Village Hall, Post Office and Primary School. Condover, Shropshire Council hasn't, to my knowledge, undertaken an impact assessment on Condover Village Conservation Area, nor the Grade 2 listed bridge. Only the applicant has carried out an assessment, and this focuses entirely on noise from the quarry, not on the potential damage from a consistent flow of increased quarry lorries to the village highway infrastructure or the day-to-day lives of residents along the route. In a response to comments made by CRAG, the amended report says that the physical characteristics has not changed for 55 years. This may be so, but the village has grown by 20% in 5 years, and the size of vehicles using the road has changed measurably in the past 55 years. The part of the route between the village hall and the post office is a single carriageway road with regard to lorries, and when 2 lorries meet on this structured road, they have to mount the pavement to squeeze by. Similarly, the road narrows just north of the school, and lorries have to mount the pavement there when they meet. In the application, it summarises that there have been no accidents here. Therefore, this route is fine to more than double the amount of quarry lorries. Are we really saying it is okay to more than double the amount of lorries that have when they meet on these single carriageway parts of the route? It surely cannot be right for lorries to mount the pavement every day, Monday to Friday, in order they may get past each other, particularly as we are trying to encourage, for instance, more children to walk to school. As I've said before, this revised application does not address the reasons for refusal of the previous application in March, and so I urge the committee to overturn the offered recommendation for approval as they did in March this year. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Right, so now we've got Richard Spartan, and you're the owner of the business, and you have 2.5 minutes to speak, sir.
2.5 or 3?
Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm going to change actually what I've written down in response to what I can hear going on. It's our family business that was started by my grandfather in 1947. Quarry started in the early 1960s, and we spent that time desperately searching for a solution to this problem. What we're trying to propose is that instead of trying to do 500,000 tonnes, which is what most quarries do, we're trying to support the local network of small builders. You know, if people around this room are trying to do DIY projects, you'll be buying from, you know, you'll be having a small builder in, and that's our market, that's who we supply. If Gonsall doesn't supply it, where is it going to come from? And I think we need to focus on that, because it's going to have to come an awful long way, and with HS2 being built, all the quarries to the east of Shropshire are flat out, they're at capacity. We can't get enough lorries even ordered to deliver, and what we're going to see is, the roller coaster of toilet rolls to fuel will be hitting the construction industry. This material is needed, and I'm trying to reduce the output to as small as I can. To put it in perspective, much is made of, they sound like huge numbers, 110,000 tonnes, the fact that we're doubling output. We're not. For 10 years that I worked in the quarry when I was younger, we did 200,000 tonnes plus. From 1960s onwards, we've done at least 150,000, more like 200,000 every year, year in, year out. I tried to reduce the tonnage down to only 50,000. Firstly, it wasn't economic. Secondly, we've had planning issues with our Bridge North site, and we've seen huge demand during COVID, and a roller coaster of people sort of a bit like fuel at the moment, or pre-ordering a huge amount of minerals earlier on this year because they were worried they weren't going to get any. So against that background, perhaps you can understand that what's actually happening is 110,000 tonnes sounds a big number, but it represents one vehicle in the first hour of the day, let's say, goes into our site and out. The next hour, 2 vehicles will go in and come back out. As the planning officer has suggested, we'll restrict them so they can't leave the quarry during the school periods, but that's the level of traffic we're talking about. Unfortunately, the local people believe that every single HGV that is ours, and it isn't. There's plenty of other HGVs going through the industrial estate and from all local farms carrying grain and all different produce, but everybody thinks and perceives they're all our vehicles, and they're not. It is literally, it's 15 loads a day, which is 1.5 vehicles an hour, and that's, as I said, to get everybody to understand, that one vehicle goes in 1 hour. So in a 60-minute period an hour, for 58 minutes, we haven't got any vehicles anywhere near this portion of the village, and some hours it would be 59 minutes.
Okay. You've got your time next, sorry.
Okay.
Call on Liam Toland. And you also have 2.5 minutes to address the committee, so thank you.
Good afternoon. In respect of planning matters, the application has been assessed by national statutory bodies and the council's special technical officers. These specialists have no objection on either technical or amenity grounds to the proposals. The council's planning officer, with over 32 years experience in mineral planning, has taken on board the comments and assessed conclusions of all specialist consultants and has weighed these against the development plan policies. In doing so, he has unrefutably recommended the granting of permission subject to conditions and legal obligations. We appreciate that there has been concern raised from some residents of Condover Village, and turning to the main concerns raised, we make the following comments. We also stress that these need to be considered and addressed in factual terms, specifically relating to the planning context. Firstly, SAMDEV. As clearly pointed out in the committee report and additional representations report, whilst the development guidelines of MD5B require a new access onto the A49, this is indicative guidance and does not form part of the policy itself. The proposals are considered to be compliant overall with relevant policies and guidance, and the need for a proposed quarry extension is accepted. If the extension did not proceed, then the mineral in this extension would effectively be sterilised in conflict with national and local mineral policy, including SAMDEV policy MD16. In terms of highways, the applicant's highways consultant and Shropshire Council's Highways Development Control Department both assessed that the existing access between Dunsloe Quarry and the A49 is of an acceptable standard to cater for the volume and type of vehicles that use this route. The County Highways Officer concluding that it is considered that a highway objection is not warranted, and moreover an objection on highway capacity and or safety is not sustainable. In terms of heritage amenity, I'll simply read the supplementary comment from the Historic Environment Team Leader. In my view, raising any objections on the grounds of prospective impacts on the conservation area arising from increased HGV movements would be very difficult to sustain and appeal. I'm also not aware that there is any evidence available that would support such an objection. In summary, there are no technical, amenity or planning reasons to refuse this application. We hope you can support your officer's thorough, properly balanced and procedurally correct assessment. We would appreciate these aspects are taken into consideration by the Southern Planning Committee members in determining this application. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Welcome back, Graham.
Yes,
Please, sorry. No, if I can just respond quickly to a couple of points raised earlier on, including by Mr. Marvin. Firstly, there is the statement that there's been no heritage impact assessment of the conservation area. I think that we have to look at the comments of the Historic Environment Officer as identified in the report and referred to by Mr. Tolland in that respect. It isn't always the case that a proposal requires a heritage impact assessment to assess a transport route. This wasn't expressly required by Historic England, but it has been, this issue has been expressly looked at by the Historic Environment team, who have advised the team leader that this would be very difficult to defend on appeal. There isn't the evidence of walls being crashed, pavements being cracked, services being affected, and I think in the plan that shows the conservation area, it does show that there are a few heritage assets which are close up against the haulage route, but the bulk of them are to the southeast in the main sort of nucleus of the conservation area, and apart from the bridge and two listed buildings, other things are generally set back along the routes. I think the point perhaps needs to be made, reiterated, that the quarry traffic is not doubling relative to historic norms. It is doubling relative to the recent planning consent, 2017 planning consent, which was a major reduction in the output relative to previous planning consents, which allowed 200,000, 190,000 tonnes to legally go through the quarry. And in recognition of the concerns of the local community in 2017, when the current operational consent was issued, that level was reduced, but it wasn't reduced due to highway instructions, highway objections. It was reduced because the applicant was trying to actually address the concerns and reconcile the concerns of the local community. And at that time, there was a specialist mineral which was in the extension area at that time, which is a sort of fine building sand. And it wasn't considered that that would be marketed at a sort of the rate of previous marketing, because the previous planning consents had operated in a wider sort of area of mineral market. There were more different types of mineral, and therefore the output could be greater. In the event, I think with the benefit of hindsight, the situation could not have been foreseen, but the major quarry to the north, Condover, had been out of production for 2 years. There'd been a sudden sort of surge on demand for building sand due to COVID and everyone wanting to build home extensions, which couldn't have been foreseen at the time the application was determined. There was a demand therefore to tie into medium-term contracts, and without Condover Quarry nearby to fulfil that demand, it was a problem. Now Condover Quarry is due to reopen within the next sort of 3 months, I think. But as Mr. Parton has said, CONSOL is not really in direct competition. Condover Quarry is Hanson Aggregates, and it has an internal market where a lot of the material it works goes to its own cement, concrete manufacturing, and sort of other aggregate processes which are internal to the Hanson company, which is a large multinational. In Mr. Parton's case, he is a kind of a local company that supplies local demand within Shropshire, Staffordshire, Herefordshire, and sort of mid-North Wales. It's a completely different market. It's the small builder that's being looked at. I think the only other point that I want to highlight on this one, given the absence of objection and technical consultees, including conservation, including highways, we are in
if we go into an appeal on the current, the previous refusal, then we are in an automatically weak position. If you refuse something on highway grounds, and there's no support from the highway authority.
Point of order, please, Chair. Point of order. You're discussing the appeal. We are discussing the application. The appeal is not before us.
Can I just explain why that is? Because there is a clear interrelationship between the outcome of this application and the outcome of the appeal. Because if this application is approved, then the applicant has indicated that the appeal will be withdrawn, and therefore the council would be in a position where if the appeal was lost, then the 150,000 tonnes would be the outcome. And there may be and it's not material to the consideration here, but in a circumstance where a decision is made contrary to officer recommendation, and it's to refuse based on highway reasons, and there's no highway objection from the highway authority, then there is the possibility of an award of costs. It's not material to this application, but it is, in a wider corporate sense, an issue. So I think
continued. Can we clarify from the legal that we cannot take into account any costs that may be due to the council when we make this decision?
I acknowledge that's the case.
Yes, so just sure it's clarified. And
the issue is the
council. You did raise it, which I don't think you should have.
Okay, yeah, I accept that. The issue is that the council would be in a position where it had to defend an appeal, where it may have a weak basis for that defence because there is no technical support from highways or conservation regarding that. And if it is a weak position, and if as a consequence of that there is the appeal succeeds, then the default scenario would be that the output level reverts to 150,000 tonnes in the previous application, and there may even be a question over whether the inspector would accept the principle of the highway maintenance contribution, which we've negotiated carefully with the applicant to secure, which has the potential to deliver benefits for Condover generally and all traffic, of which this quarry amounts to only around a third, and under 110,000 tonnes per annum. So, sorry, Chair, I won't go on.
Thank you. Councillor Tindall, please.
Yes, I understand from this morning's briefing that council was asked to provide an opinion on this very matter, and therefore I would propose that the planning committee meeting is adjourned while members of the committee look at council's opinion.
Thank you. If you'll take the time, please. No. Sorry, that's what Kelly.
It's available for us right now.
Can I just say that elements contributing to the legal advice the council has obtained is reported in the additional representation sheet. Whilst we can't report council's advice, we can cite case law. And in the additional representation sheet, in addition to the case that's mentioned by the applicant, regarding where the use of should and shall and must, has a bearing. There's also equivalent advice which reaffirms the fact that we cannot place as much weight on the core strategy development guideline, on the Sando development guideline requirement to put in a new access to the A49 as we can to the policy itself. And that what that guidance indicates is that compliance, it isn't necessary to comply with the development guidelines in order to comply with the development plan overall.
Follow that? Well, it appears that they want to support my proposal to see council's opinion, which is a shame because I think it would have alerted us to the dangers of refusing this application, but so be it.
Okay, do you want to speak?
Sorry.
Do you want to speak apart from what you just said?
No,
Okay. Open up the committee and the debate, please. Who would like to start us off? Councillor Hunt.
Thank you. Obviously, this is a very challenging one. which is why not many hands went up to start with, although there was a quick flurry of them, which I was the first. I've read through this twice, actually, and I didn't know I was going to be on the committee until Sunday. So it was my weekend thing. And I think it's very thorough and very understandable. And I am wholly sympathetic to the people of Condover, wholly sympathetic. But that doesn't mean, I've been through this, as I say, twice, and I can't find anything in there that would give us a basis for legitimately rejecting this. Unfortunately, it has been in operation for 50 odd years. There is no damage to any of the heritage infrastructure. There have been no RTAs, and I think I'm not going to repeat what's been said, but I think we do need to be very, very careful. And I understand why Councillor Boddington was saying we have to consider this matter as is. But I was also very mindful of the fact that if we reject this and the other appeal were to be successful, actually we would be making the situation worse for the people of Condover. There are no grounds to refuse it, I'm afraid. I can't find any grounds to refuse it. So I will be supporting the officer's recommendation.
Okay. Councillor Parsons?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think that I sat on the original decision back in March, which was obviously a different application, but along similar lines. And I don't think that there was a feeling that this business should not be able to expand and to produce more product. The issue was where that product would travel from the quarry to wherever it was eventually going to go to. And I don't believe, as has been stated earlier, that MD5B is no longer valid. I think that remains a significant issue, and that any expansion of the quarrying facility should be in line with the new road being built between the quarry and the A49. And I hear the issues about what Highways England might think of that, but this sort of volume of traffic through a village like Condover is not appropriate in my view. And we have set down in the past, we as a council set down many sort of planning policies. And it seems over the past few months we've been moving away from some of those that we have actually set down in writing. But this one here, in my book, still stands. And I don't believe that this would be overturned at appeal. I know what we're hearing, because I don't believe an inspector would overturn on that particular ground. And that's why I believe that this application has come before us. If the applicant felt they were going to win at appeal in December for 150,000 tonnes, they wouldn't be here now with 110,000. So my view is that this still stands, and I won't be supporting this application.
Thank you. Councillor Boddington, please.
Thank you. Councillor Parsons covered much of the ground really, and that the policies do stand. We do hear that those in the schedule can be overridden, if that's the right phrase when you're talking about a relief road, but they're still there. It's not that we must ignore them, but we might ignore them. And this is really quite critical in the language of this, and they are there. And why is that policy there? It is there because Condover needs relief. The current situation in Condover is unacceptable without putting any more traffic on the road. And my understanding of the principal purpose of planning, not the specific policies, but the principal purpose is to achieve betterments and to improve people's lives, improve their existence, so they breathe less foul air, they don't have to squeeze onto pavements, they don't have to stand there while lorries squeeze past each other. Amazingly, we had 20 shots of Condover today without a single HGV on them. I'm a regular traveller on the Condover Omnibus, otherwise known as 435, from Ludlow to Shrewsbury. I assure you, there are a lot of HGVs on that road, because I sit on the bus while we're waiting to get past and everything squeezes past. The quality of life is not good for residents of Condover. We have a policy absolutely designed to improve it. So, a lot's been said about conservation. Simply we don't have a survey. The fact that buildings are still standing, anybody in conservation will know, doesn't mean that they're not eroding. With all that traffic going past, with the salt splash, and with the weight of the traffic, you cannot say that the historic fabric is not being affected. Okay, we're getting the stuff about the planning appeal and that, and I'll leave that to one side, because with Councillor Parsons, I don't think we'd be here today if they had absolute confidence in winning that appeal. So I think that we had the same choices last time. It is this very similar scheme to last time, and we should reject it again.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just ask a question? I'm just struggling to understand the concept that if you license somebody to extract a certain tonnage, how can you exceed that, and how do we control it? So is it possible, if we did grant permission for this, that you could actually have some controls there to ensure that the tonnage that you've agreed to be extracted is just that and not exceeded? Have we got any controls whatsoever?
Yes, obviously we have an output tonnage restriction. It can be and will be monitored. There will be CCTV, there will be gate receipts from weighbridge receipts. There will also be sort of livery of the HGV will allow local residents to identify the vehicle movements. As I explained earlier on, the fact that there has been some non-compliance with the 50,000 tonne output limit was due to a series of unforeseen situations. We did serve a pre-enforcement letter on the applicant. We gave time for them to actually revert to compliance. And what has happened is that a lot of the traffic was generated by a bagging plant that was operating at Gonsill Quarry, and where the three principal customers who are receiving large bags of aggregate off the back of articulated low loaders, which are larger type of vehicles. Well, that bagging plant has been relocated at significant expense to the applicant's quarry at Moreville, near Bridgnorth, and those low loaders are now travelling down the Bridgnorth Road in order to do that, and not travelling through Condover. So there were sort of extenuating circumstances, but had the non-compliance proceeded for much longer, we would have had to have taken enforcement action. There is a protocol which we have, which determines when enforcement action is taken by the council. It is a discretionary activity, and we have to ensure that you know, if we take it, because it involves officer time and you know there are other elements, then it may not be deemed sort of appropriate to take enforcement action. If an applicant or developer is proactively seeking to address the reasons for the non-compliance, and in this case, the fact that the bagging plant has been relocated to Moreville Quarry was a mitigating circumstance that justified us in not taking immediate enforcement action. But we made it very clear in our pre-action protocol letter that should the situation persist, then we would have to take enforcement action. So it wasn't the case that we weren't taking it, we weren't enforcing it, but there were extenuating circumstances. And I think the fact that it was also the unique market situation with the closure of the quarry, the COVID, and the in sort of home extension and such like, and the fact that this quarry was providing, you know, a principal supply of that material. And I think that, you know, you have to use a degree of judgment in deciding when to do enforcement. But clearly, we would be looking to reinforce our
enforcement mechanisms to ensure compliance moving forward, and this is a discussion that we need to have with the applicant, and which would be executed in the event that the officer recommendation was accepted.
Okay, can I just say, I think that that should be a part of the decision, if you do actually approve this application, that the tonnage extracted is just that and no more. Controls must be made and taken, I think, to be fair to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hignett, please.
Thank you, Chair. There seems to be some uncertainty regarding the number of movements of quarry vehicles compared with, say, for instance, farm traffic, other industrial traffic, Condover Hall traffic just passing through, even some of which will be HGVs. I was noting that the survey was done during the COVID restrictions in 2020, which probably was a pretty useless survey. I think we should have had a more recent one. I'm looking at the suggestion that a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit may help, but that would be up to Shropshire Council to decide if this application did proceed. We certainly need all the mineral extraction that we can get over the next several, probably more years in this country without having to try and import it, and I'll take that into consideration. At the end of the day, residents of Condover are looking for us to uphold their right to walk and cycle in their village, not unhindered, but with some reasonable safety. And as we've heard a lot today about the unsafe nature of Station Road, I'm not sure that we are doing the residents of Condover a reasonable service in that respect. Having said that, I agree with Councillor Hunt that we must have legally defendable reasons to refuse this application. And I'm quite honest, on balance at the moment, I'm not sure that we have enough reasons, although if somebody puts forward a proposal with adequate reasons to refuse, then I'll certainly consider it. Thank you.
Councillor Tindall, please.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to ask Graham French. I got myself in a frightful muddle, it's probably because I'm so bloody stupid. But if the quarry was overproducing material in the previous period, then whether it's bagged at Condover or bagged at their new plant in Telegraph Lane, I can't see the difference. The product still's got to be brought out of the quarry, and what happens to it is it may explain an increase in vehicles, I don't deny that, but it doesn't explain the overproduction, at least it doesn't to me.
Yes, the Morville quarry has its own suppliers of aggregates, and hence the aggregate will be coming from Morville into the bagging plants rather than from Gonsall. There may be some transport of mineral from Gonsall. I'm not sure what the exact details would be, but I think that Morville has a significant 900,000 tonnes of permitted aggregates, and hence instead of using aggregate from the Gonsall quarry, the three principal customers will be taking their low loaders to Morville instead. What would then happen is that the remaining mineral that's coming out of the quarry will not be being on the low loaders of the three principal customers. It wouldn't be large bags of sand. It would be smaller rigid chassis 20-ton wagons which are transporting aggregate from Gonsall to Morville Quarry for the bagging plants and to other sort of uses where they can directly transfer the mineral to the end user without it needing to be bagged. So ultimately it's 110,000 tonnes that's being proposed, but that would be rigid chassis vehicles where the drivers are from the company and know the local road through Condover very well. The Arctics are more sort of damaging because they're longer, they have a wider turning circle, and they're less easy to negotiate past other traffic in the oncoming direction.
Chairman, I think we're slightly at cross purposes. I was going back to when they were overproducing aggregate, and you said that was because they were bagging it at Gonsall. Is that right? But I don't see how that. whether they bagged it or not, it still was overproduction. And that's what I was trying to get at.
Yeah, the from between 2017 and 2020, the end of 2020, there has been overproduction at the quarry, which you're aware of. And as I say, we've taken, we've warned them, and they've taken proactive measures, and the measures have been to transfer the bagging plant. The removal of the bagging plant, which occurred towards, well, I think it would have been about 3 months ago that it became operational. So the effects on traffic in Condover have only sort of recently become apparent. But the key point is they're not bringing the Arctics, the customer Arctics, through the village. In terms of how the overproduction plays in terms of the mineral at the site, obviously the mineral has depleted at a greater rate than would have done had it been being exported at a compliant rate of 50,000 tonnes per annum. There is still the pence per tonne levy on that, and we're still entitled to around 50,000 from the existing planning consent, plus another 65,000 anticipated from what remains in the ground for the southern extension. So we're not losing any highway subsidy. What we are doing is removing the HGVs from the centre of the larger Arctics from the centre of the village and replacing them with rigid chassis where the lorry driver is from the company and knows the route well.
I won't keep on flogging this one.
Any more speakers, please? Okay, Councillor Lombe, then Councillor Dakin.
Yes, I'm a little split on this, and there's some things that I don't necessarily agree with, like if we turn this down, the land becomes sterilised. Just because it's not economical to extract, it is still there until such times as it is economical, because it's not being built over. That said, we have got a responsibility to all the taxpayers in Shropshire, and I am mindful that it's going to cost on appeal either way. I don't agree that they're here, the applicants are here because they've got a poor case. I think, and the experience of Ironbridge to that, is that the officers try their best to have a resolution that suits both. I'd also written down about the restrictions imposed, monitor, provide evidence base to manage the tonnage, and then the words were extracted out of my mouth. But that is a concern for me, because I do want to help the residents of Condover. I am mindful that it isn't the same application as before, because the bagging has been removed and the tonnage is at the lower end. If we historically, if it was always 150 to 200, yes, we've had the 50,000 which was exceeded, but it is better, and with the mitigation being provided by the application, I'm just swinging towards supporting the officers.
Councillor Dakin, please.
I support what Councillor Hunt said about this. It's going to be almost impossible to turn this down because we don't have the evidence to turn it down. I'd rather go the other way now and say, if we're limiting the tonnage from here, as has been suggested, that we do limit the tonnage from here, and there's no necessity to have HGVs that are articulated, and whether we can stop any articulated vehicles leaving there carrying whichever. That's a condition.
Any more speakers, please?
Can I just say I agree with that? If we could control the size of lorries and make sure the extraction rate is controlled as well, I don't see no reason other than to accept this application.
First of all, can we restrict it? There's a simple question. Can we say you cannot have Class 1 HGVs, and it must be with their own drivers? I'm not sure we can. I'm sure Graham will answer that in a minute. I think one point was touched on one of my fellow councillors as well, is we do need to be mindful about all of the small builders in Shropshire who get their aggregate from here. We are in an unprecedented phase of building, as it was during COVID. I think we're going to chase our tails a bit on this. I would like an answer on that, and then I'm happy to come back with a recommendation that we approve the officers subject to whatever extra conditions we can put in, but I can't put those in until I know what they are.
Okay, thank you, Greg. Come back, David, please.
Yeah, the bagging plant removes the larger Arctics automatically to the Morville site and away from Condover. Obviously, it is difficult where you have a sort of owner-driver to restrict their movements on the public highway as an individual. However, the company has the ability to dictate the type of traffic which it allows to enter its sites. So whilst we couldn't prevent owner drivers from travelling wherever they like on the public highway with whatever size vehicles, other than weight restrictions, we could call upon the company to implement a voluntary code of conduct which restricts the use of HGVs at the site to avoid the larger Arctics, and we could enforce or at least invigilate that through a kind of a recording system, which but I would need to discuss the detail of that more with the applicants. However, if members are minded to go with the officer's recommendation, subject to that proviso, then we would immediately enter into dialogue with the applicant in order to secure something which hopefully fulfills that instruction.
Thank you.
In which case, then, subject to that proviso and you having discussion with the applicants to be able to put in, and I completely understand what you're saying, if you pay your road tax, whether you're an HGV class 1 or a milk float, you're entitled to be on the road. So subject to that proviso, I'm quite happy to move the officer's recommendations.
Okay, have you a seconder for that, please?
I'd like to second that, please, if possible.
Okay. The proposal and a seconder on the table to approve the officer's recommendation with the proviso of officers working with the applicant to see if they can sort out problems with the traffic or reduce the traffic numbers. Right. All those in favour of that suggestion, please? 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All those against? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That is carried as the officer's recommendation with the conditions. Thank you. Record reporting back in, please.
Andy, why do people want to see the castle? Well, I don't mind. I think you don't like working in secret.
Oh, right.
I didn't, that was saying no. Yeah. I would vote against it, except it's never second. Fair enough. We did. We did. I don't think that decision is going to do us much good. No. Hawks to the north. Graham, you're on a winning streak.
I am, 2 in a row.
2 in a row.
It's never happened before.
It hasn't, really.
Don't sleep no game tonight.
You've got Richard just coming.
Yeah, we've got to go right now, yeah. Okay. Thank you, Richard. If you now could do the list of appeals, please, and the appeal decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Richard Fortune, Fiscal Planner. 6 appeals to just advise members on. Firstly, appeal dismissed for change of use for camping at 50 temperatures in camping units at Opens Leisure Camp in Street Harton. Essentially, the inspector decided that the harm to AONB outweighed any benefits to tourism and the biodiversity enhancements offered. We then got an appeal hearing that's due for the 25th of November in respect of the committee's refusal of the housing scheme at the council offices at Westgate. And that's one which, essentially, the committee refused on grounds relating to the layout of the development and also the issue of the parking arrangements on Ludlow Road, with tandem parking and reversing of vehicles onto the highway. So our statement is due 18th of October, and currently working on that with essentially with Robert and Andy Boddington, who will be representing the committee's views at that hearing.
So 16th or 18th, you said?
Statements will be done by the 18th of October. And hearing date is the 25th of November. We then have an appeal to Land, which was for a sliding gate at a property at Burgess Condover. Our highway officers have concerns over safety issues, but the inspector considered that there was minimal risk to highway safety in that case. Then we have the Morville Arms Actars site of Morville. This was the first application the committee had and had no linkage with the public house refurbishment in terms of the actual application details. And that appeal has been dismissed. The inspector gave weight to the issues of the appeal was dismissed there in terms of on the basis of the council's guidelines on terms of number of houses in the cluster being exceeded, and you can consider it would undermine the council's planned approach to delivery of houses. So obviously there has been a subsequent application that the committee did approve, which incorporated the public house with a legal agreement to facilitate its refurbishment, but the first application did not have that linkage within it, and purely on the issue of number of houses, the inspector found it was unacceptable, but obviously members found other material considerations in the revised application subsequently that allowed the scheme to be approved. We then have a situation with another application, which was extensions to property at Dulles Cottage, Bewdley, where the inspector concluded that it was out of character with that property and harming the supposed property and the surrounding area. And finally, we have an appeal to Hello, which is for one of these private applications for conversion of farm buildings to dwellings, a class security appeal. Essentially, the inspector disagreed with the officers' views in terms of the structural solidity of the building, the impact of livestock buildings on the occupants, and also one whereby there was an application for costs in this case. And whilst he dismissed the claim against the 2 reasons for refusal, he did consider that the council introduced a third reason in the appeal, which was not on the decision notice, in terms of what was the lawful use of the building. And on that basis, he has awarded a partial award of costs to the applicants in that case. So it's just a warning to officers as much as anybody else that we have to be careful that when we have refusal reasons, that is all we can apply to the appeal. We cannot introduce or draw on that in the actual appeal of the cases that we have. So it is one of those situations where, yes, you find the exactly why you find schemes unacceptable needs to be carefully done at the outset. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Richard. Our next meeting is November the 2nd at 2 o'clock. I just thank you all for attending today. I'd like to thank the officers for the extensive reports, and to Vince, our solicitor, and also our clerk for the day, sat at the back of the room. Thank you very much, and have a safe journey home. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.